lot of my movies are very like music based, you know, a lot of, you know, like, so You're Next and The Guest have, you know, like they're very dependent on their kind of electronic soundtracks and, you know, kind of those things. And so like going into this one, I was a little worried because, you know, so much of my style comes from that. And, but it was a good challenge to go into something where I knew I couldn't rely on my usual, you know, fallbacks. And I think ultimately, that fact alone not only made the movie better, but I feel like really made me a much better filmmaker because I had to really get outside my comfort zone.
That's you know, one of the great things about working with Adam is that he's a sound designer and a composer, and he knows how to layer things in. We're all about layers in the sound and in the picture too.
Adam's like exceptionally good at sound. Like he has synthesizers, he has he writes music. So when you communicate with him about sound, you can use a lot of the vocabulary that you would use if like we were to discuss sound with each other. And so it makes things a lot easier.
I knew that I wanted to play by the found footage rules. I didn't want to get out of that. I wanted to stay in that kind of reality. And so I knew that we couldn't use conventional score at all. So what I ended up doing is I ended up creating these kind of soundscapes that technically are music, but they're very like subliminal in the film.
Adam is creating the music as he's cutting the picture. So what he delivers to us is what we use. You know, there's no real tweaking of it per se, other than just getting it to fit, you know, within the space.
But it worked, I mean, because it's like all the pads that he created and evolved with, you know, they kind of like fit with all of the digital noise, weird stuff that was created as well.
We would edit the set pieces together and they would kind of work, but then you just put on this little drone that you don't even notice really that you're hearing in the movie until you're really looking for it.
It added a whole other dimension to a film. Normally we wouldn't have music in it, and the only way to get music into it was how he did it.
It was a different experience because I couldn't rely on any kind of synthetic sound, so it needed to have an organic quality that fit in. So it was a lot of, you know, playing with, you know, real noises and altering them and slowing them down and reverbing them and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
I got to give credit to Lionsgate and Jason Constantine for giving us the freedom and the resources to spend, I think, 5 weeks on a mix with Jeff and Andy.
I think one of the things that we came to terms with early on was the duality of, well, it has to feel like a found footage piece, so it has to feel real, but we also want to afford ourselves an opportunity to really go big. You know, because we are going to reveal the B-dub and we're going to experience the woods in a manner like they haven't been experienced before, you know. So that's the difference between the 99 version and ours, is that we, for the first 20, 25, like the first reel and maybe some of reel 2, we're actually much more mono, and we're much more, each camera has its own sort of sonic identity. So in the first 20, 25 minutes, we actually really are sticking with those rules and playing with that, and so we're giving the intention of believing that we're just watching this found footage stuff. And then we slowly sort of faded out of those rules to where we would then allowed ourselves to go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and to experience the entire sort of sonic spectrum and you know, width that you are allowed to explore in a movie theater.
And also being like found footage, we could do things like I built a lot of different sounds within the modular synthesizer, and you think you're in the woods, like why would you have these kinds of sounds? But you can create these kind of weird RF sounds and weird buzzes and things like that, and they all kind of work because it's just like, you know, somebody found all this stuff after the fact, and you know, this equipment isn't working right and everything, so you kind of have some liberties there. Right. And I also used a lot of contact mic stuff because I wanted everything to feel really close if it's close to you.
And we're experimenting all the way up until the very end. Like as we're mixing, you know, on the stage we're dialing stuff in or rethinking sections and sort of redesigning stuff on the fly as well, because, you know, I think it's in that environment when we're on the stage, which is, you know, basically a replica of a movie theater but with all the gear in it, that we're actually experiencing it in the manner that we want the viewer to experience it. So we have a different take on it from as we were experiencing it in our heads or in our edit suites.
Yeah.
You know, now we're actually in the dark room watching this big thing, and so it influences us in that way too. So we have that flexibility to continue to tweak and change and rethink, you know, entire sections.
Yeah, and I think it's specifically like at the end, all of the B-dub kind of like banging around in the basement and climbing up the stairs and everything like that. It became like very much like, you know, like what feels the best way to get her, you know, up the stairs for that one reveal that's just so intense.
You know, we never knew what the witch was going to sound like until Jeff came up with that sound at the very end. We had put different animal sounds in there for her, but then once Jeff came in with that sound, we knew, oh wow, this works.
It's a really inspired sound. I mean, you can talk a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so my ideas for the Blair Witch, as I saw it, right, which is not to say this is the mythology, but, you know, it's a tragedy, really, that this person was dragged out into the woods in 1850 and hung up on a tree with weights on her and all this stuff. But at the same time, this person has clearly made a deal with the devil, otherwise they would not be creeping around at this point in time. So I wanted to create kind of the duality of evilness and also fear, because I think fear turns into that violence and that thrashing out of evil. So the banshee screaming is specifically happens when you look at her. And she wants you to look, no, don't look at me, get away from me, don't, you know, and she's actively trying to push you away. And then the growl kind of sound happens when she thinks she has you. And she's coming up behind you, and you're scared and she's not. So, you know, I kind of created these rules and kind of like applied them as we went through the film.
Come to my palace in the woods. This is how we roll in style.
What was great was that we had incredible source material from production. Like the guy that recorded all of the dialogue on set did a great job. It was all super, super clean. And so, but then the task becomes, okay, well, you've got all these pristine recordings that in a way almost do sound like ADR. So then I actually, in my Pro Tools timeline, I went through and I identified each camera and made a sort of color-coded chart that followed the timeline, so I knew whose camera I was on and what sonic identity that camera had, and was cutting stuff across these different tracks to accommodate those shifts in perspective from the different cameras. So the task was to take this great source material and then just blow it up to the point that it was, you know, had its own sort of like, this is a DV cam, this is obviously like this mic is falling apart, and so it's got distortions and clicks and dropouts.
I had run the guide track, the dialogue guide track. I had sent that out of Pro Tools to an FM transmitter, sent that to a radio, several radios really, and mic'd those up and recorded this glitched out, weird, horrible return on that. So I had this, like, you know, for the entire film I had a good base level of glitch ready to go for each little moment. I could pull it down, and sometimes it worked. And sometimes I had to go find something that was exceptionally messed up and go pull that into that area as well.
Yeah.
But that was a good basis point.
That was happening on the effects side, and then on the dialogue side, I was taking syllables and chunks of different people from all different places in the movie and doing similar techniques that would also then line up with the effects. And then we would get to play with different levels and relationships of those two as well. So a lot of that stuff is really geeky and intellectual. And that probably doesn't come through, but.
I did some work with hard drives. I took hard drives and I took the tops off them. I went to the engineering department and said, hey, do you got any old hard drives you guys are about to crush? They gave me 10 or 15 hard drives. And so I put a contact mic on the hard drives, and I would try to power them on. Sometimes they would turn on, sometimes they wouldn't. You know, they were very old drives. I would mess with the power to try to get them to kind of like kick on slightly and not. I took the top off and had the drive spinning, exposed completely, and dripped sand into it as it was spinning, and just waited until it just crashed. That's a lot of that hard drive recording stuff.
Yeah.
And that beeping at the end.
Yeah, it's the error.
It's that error message came from a hard drive after it seized. But it was the weirdest electronic beep sound I've ever heard, because it was like, it's kind of mechanical, and
yeah, it had a very organic feel
it has
to it
a
for being an
constant
alarm.
repetition,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it just worked so well. I was like, oh, this is great. We're gonna have to use this.
I'm particularly proud of the tent moment, because the first time I saw that, first time when we spotted the film for the first time, that was one of my intense, like, shit your pants, oh my God moments, and really wanted to preserve that in the final. And I think we definitely achieved that. Yeah.
Level 11 with
Yeah.
that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool.
Just the other side of legal on that one.
I think for me, the design for the Blair Witch, her growl,
Yeah.
for me, that was the most challenging thing to do, and also the most rewarding. The idea behind that, for me, is that this creature, this thing, this entity, is part of the woods. It is becoming more wood-like, and it has kind of like this, you know, strange gait and all these things, and I wanted to present that as a sound. So, you know, using these growls, I used wood creaks and things and morphed them together to kind of create this roar that happens. So for me, you know, that was definitely the thing, and I think, you know, Adam heard it here, and he's like, yes, that's it. And we didn't play it for anybody else.
It's true, right?
And so on stage, it was like Keith and Jess and Simon are there, and it's like we're mixing towards it, and everybody, and Adam and I and Andy are like, ha ha ha. Like,
Yeah.
So,
and similarly with Jason, when he came in, Jason, our creative exec at Lionsgate,
Yeah.
you know, first impression, and you know, his sort of jaw dropped. So we're like, okay,
yeah.
we're safe.